Okay, hi folks. Starting a video here for the first tutorial of the data management class. Updating here from the other one that's on the Brightspace, but hoping that this gives you a little bit more information about some of the things that we were working on today in class. So starting from this tutorial file, we have a README file, which is always a very good practice. And again, just walking through Excel, like all of the other Microsoft programs, we have all of these banners up here at the top, and we have different tools that are available in each of them. And so we'll work on these a lot as we go through, but there's things like Home, where it's all of your fonts and styles and things like that. You have Insert, where you can do things like make charts or pivot tables. You have Page Layout, where you can determine how you might want to print any of these things. This is a good tab that allows you to work on or to be able to look up different aspects of functions. So if you don't know which function it is that you're looking for, you could click this Insert Function button and then type a brief description of what you want, say variance, and get a list of things that might help you. There's a Data tab, which we'll use quite a bit throughout this course, but not as much that you need to work on right now. A Review tab, where you can check things like spelling. View to change if you want to say add a second window, or if you want to change whether you see the grid lines or the headings and stuff like that. And there's a couple of other ones that might not be available for you guys until you adjust them in options, but those are your main ones that you're looking at. So as the basics of Excel, I have these couple of sheets here. So you can have different sheets if you have the XLSX file. As a reminder, it doesn't save extra sheets. If you have the CSV file, it only saves it as text file and one sheet without any formulas or functions or figures. So in this one, the way that Excel works is that you can have these different sheets, and in each one of them, there's this grid with rows, 1 to however many, and columns A through however many other columns. And you can work in Excel by doing different things in each one of these cells. So right now in cells B1 to B19, we have this little row, this little column of data, and we have it with this little box plot that it's made for it. So what we're going to do first is calculate all of the basic descriptive statistics from these ones, this little column of data that we did in class. So the way that we tell Excel that we want to start writing a function is we click on the cell anywhere here, and then you can write the equals key. If you write equals, it tells it that you're going to write a function. So we start writing the word count, which is the function to count the number of cells in a range that contains numbers. And we can either click on this one as it pops up here out of our options. And if we double click it, then it opens our bracket and fills in the function. And you can see here, all of the functions in Excel tell you exactly what it needs. You can type them in the cell that you're working in, or you can go up here to the formula bar. In this case, count requires that you have an argument for value 1. And you can see that's bolded. If you want to, you can do a comma, and then you can provide optional values. And what these square brackets mean is that it's not required, it's just an optional thing. And then the ... at the end means you can add as many different values as you want, separated by commas. But what we can do is just click on this cell B2, and then we hold it with our mouse and we drag down. And you can see that I'm highlighting because of the little white crosshair in the middle of it. And I just let go with the mouse there, and you can see that now what it's going to do is count all of the number of numbers within the range of B2 to B18. Nice and simple. Next, we're going to do that for average, and the Excel function for average is the word average. And here we can start to navigate with our mouse, or with our arrow keys rather. And so instead of clicking and dragging, which I could do here, just click and drag, what I'll do instead is, from writing inside the function, if you start to move with your arrow keys, you can pick where things are. If I hold the Shift key, it'll start to, I can highlight different different areas as I am moving my arrow keys. So in this case, I hold the Shift key and I highlight all of those. I just click enter and it'll calculate the mean. Now I can calculate the variance, so equals var.s. There's an option for calculating variance based on the entire population, but that's not what we want. So var.s, we open our bracket, and then we can actually navigate instead of just with the shift key to highlight different things. If you hold control and you use your arrow keys, it will move you around throughout to the wherever the next value is in this thing. So you see that I jump from cell A1. If I hold control and I go press the arrow key down, it brings me to summary statistics. If I navigate up to this bottom value here, I can do control shift up and I can highlight all of those. So again, just a way that you can navigate. You can use control and shift to highlight different ranges of values. But you can also just grab it with your mouse and go down. Even if you wanted to just write it, you can write B2 to B18, and it will do the exact same thing, just different ways of getting to the same solution. You see here that Excel is not case sensitive, so you can write var.s in capital letters or in lowercase, as well as the B2 to B18, and it will recognize that that's what you're talking about. For standard deviation, stdev.s, we do the same thing. We highlight all of those values. Standard error is, if we recall, equal to standard error is the standard deviation divided by the square root of the sample size n. So we'll just call it n there. So the way that we can write that in here, because there's not actually a function for it in Excel, is we go equals. And we can reference this standard deviation cell that we've calculated above it. So we click on it like that. Now it's going to say, I'm going to do something with B25. We can use the slash, this forward slash, to specify that we want to divide by something. And then we can use the square root function, which returns the square root of a number, to take the square root of the sample size n. And we can reference that cell as well. So now what that's going to do is calculate our standard error of 0.7. And again, standard error is a bit of a special statistic because it's the first one where it's not just describing our sample, but it's starting to infer something about the population. We talked a little bit about that in class, but it's a very key kind of discrepancy between these types of statistics. We can also calculate our quartile range, which is shown here. So if we think about this, it's the quartile function, and we can use quartile inclusive, turns the quartile of the data set based on percentile values from 0 to 1, inclusive, including all of the values that are possible. So we write quartile.inc, and when we open that one, we see that quartile needs 2 arguments. So it needs an array, which is just a range of values, and that's going to be our regular B2 to B18. But it also needs a second argument, which is called quart. So what we do is we do a comma to say that we're going to add that second thing. And when we do that, it says, okay, what is your, it gives us these different options that we can have. So if we put a 0 there, it's going to give us the minimum. If we put a 1, it's going to give us the first quartile. If we give it a 2, it's going to be the median. If we give it a 3, it'll do the third quartile. And then if we give it a 4, it'll give us the maximum value. So we can just go ahead and say 1, because that's the one that we want. Click, oops. From here, if we do this, we actually have to click the tab key to make it put it into there. So we click tab, or we just write 1, whatever you want. And that give us that the first quartile is 1. So what this is doing here is this would be 0 for that option. Right there at 4, that would be our first quartile. Put it down here. If we wanted the median, that would be our second quartile. If we wanted the top of the box, that's our third quartile. And then if we wanted our maximum value, that would be our fourth quartile, or maximum value, the 4 in that quartile argument. And so just as a reminder, quartile means that whatever that percentage of the data is below that value. So this is the 25th percentile, which means that 25% of the data is below it. At the median, 50% of the data is below it. At the third, 75% of the data is below it. So 75% of the data is below this, 25% of the data is below this, and that means that 50% of the data is within this box. We can use quartile again for our median. So quartile.inclusive, array, click the values, and then we would just say median value 2 for that 50th percentile. And that would give us the value of 5. We can also use the median function, which returns the median of it. So we just, again, pick those values, and it gives us that 5 again. We can then do the quartile inclusive for the third one to get that 75th percentile. And then we tell it we want that third, and click that. For mode, we're just going to do mode singular because this is an example, but the mode is the most common number. And so if there's more than one mode, that's possible, but we're just going to pick the one of them out of there. So now we have all of these calculated for this data set. We've been able to get our descriptive statistics. We have a lot of information on where the center is and how it's dispersed away from the center. What we can do now is say we want to calculate that for this data set. We could go ahead and start writing all of that same stuff again to write out the count and average and that kind of thing. But what Excel does is its default paste is to move all of these functions relative to their current location. So for example, if I copy this cell with Control-C and I move it over here and I press Control-V to paste it, it's now not taking the count of B2 to B18, but of D2 to D18, which is just below this, right? And if I move this now to, or if I copy it and I paste it somewhere else, say lower, now it's counting from D5 to D21. And so wherever you default paste these things to, it's going to take the function that's there and it's going to calculate it relative to its new location. That's called relative referencing in Excel. So what we can actually do is, because all these data sets are set up the same, all of our example data sets, we can highlight this whole thing, we can copy it, and we can paste it over here. So one thing that I think is confusing for people when they're starting out is that there are different options when you're hovering over a cell in Excel. So right now I have the cell selected, but I'm not writing the function. So that's the first thing. If you write up here, now I'm writing in the function, and it's will have gotten rid of my copy from the other one. But when you're hovering over the cell, you can have this white one, which means that you're going to highlight cells. You can have this black cursor, which means that you want to move this cell. Or you can have this little plus sign over here, which means that you want to extend this cell to other areas. So for example, if I take this 6 up here and I extend it, it's going to put 6 over all of those other datas. And if I do make a mistake like that, you can always undo it, click that button, or you can redo it with that one. And the keystroke command for that is just Control-Z. So I go back here. I've done some stuff, so it's uncopied this. I copy it. I go over here to the same cell, so B or A20, and I Control-V. Now it's calculating all of these things based on its new location, which makes us very happy, because then we can do the same thing for our example 3, instead of me forcing you to write out all of these functions multiple times. This tab is an example of why these types of metrics are important. So what this does is it automates this graph based on these green values. So you can change these values and you could say, what happens if this has a higher standard deviation? And you'll see that this blue one gets a little bit wider. And because it's auto-generating random data, every time that you press the F9 key, it updates it. And so it does new random data into that thing. And we can shift this around. So we can say, what if they both have a mean of 150 and a standard deviation of 150? And you'll see that just by random chance, they end up looking quite different. And so you can have two data sets that have, you say, different medians like these ones, but end up actually looking quite different in terms of their distribution. And that's key when we're thinking about what is the difference between these things, because mostly we're just looking at these two numbers. and then the shape of kind of how these things gives us more information about how they're distributed. So the type of data set that we're working with for our assignment is going to be very similar in structure to this. And what this is we have 20 different people, and we ask them 10 different questions. They've given us a value of 0 to 10 for each of these different questions, and we want to calculate descriptive statistics for each one of these columns. So right now, you'll see that this is a random array. And so what this function does is it generates however many rows you want, however many columns of random numbers between certain integers, a minimum and a maximum that you specify. And then you can have it integer, or if you wanted, you can have it false to give decimals. So that's with the false default. So here, if I go back to true, it's going to generate us new random data. If we try to calculate based on this, every time that we enter into a cell, it's going to update these numbers. So what we want to do is practice one of the other pastes in Excel. So we highlight this whole thing, which we can do by, again, getting this white arrow and then dragging it all the way across. But because this is a single block of data, if we press Control A, it's going to go to this whole function. We press it again, it's going to highlight this whole block together. And so Excel is really good at recognizing blocks. So it's good to make sure that whatever tables we have, we're splitting them off from each other with at least one row between. So here we can highlight this whole block of stuff. We can copy it with Control V. We can click this plus sign to put it on a new sheet, and we can right click. And instead of pasting the functions, because what this does is it still has that random array, what we want to do instead is to paste the values. So this little one here. And what that does is now it's taken all that random data, and instead of it randomly generating new values, it's going to calculate them individually. And so that's just to expose you to the fact that you can paste things differently in Excel, and it will do different things. What we can do now is we can go back to our example, and we can copy all of this. And in class, I had you write them all out, but because I'm interested in saving some time, what I'm going to do here is paste them, the standard paste. And so you'll see that it's, again, calculating these things based on the range that we had selected before relative to the other areas. And so now it's doing B5 to B21, but that's not all of the data that we actually wanted. So there's a couple of ways that we can fix this. One of them is we can go to this little arrow and we can drag it up, and then we can click enter and it will just adjust to the actual thing. The other one is Excel recognizes that it's missing certain numbers in that range and it's not happy about it. So you can click on this little arrow thing and you can say update formula to include cells. And it's going to recognize that there are numbers next to that range that we're calculating, and it's going to automatically adjust them. So previously, it was only calculating B5 to B21, but we can click this little arrow, update formula to include cells, and now it's going from B2 to B21. And we can do that with all of these. Update formula, update formula. This one updates because it's based on those other two. Go here. Update formula, update formula, update formula, and update formula. And now we can double check that each of these is doing what we want. B2 to B21, B2 to B21. Yes, yes. This is taking the sample, the standard deviation, dividing by the square root of the sample size. Good. This is doing the first quartile of B2 to B21. This is doing the median of B2 to B21. That's the third quartile of B2 to B21. And this one is the singular mode. Cool. So we've got all these calculated. And instead of copying and pasting it all the way across, there's this other little green thing where we can highlight all of those functions. And if we grab this little corner here with the black crosshair, we can drag it to the side. And what that does is it applies these functions in their new locations. So because I dragged it, this is doing C2 to C21, as are all of the rest of them. So again, I can just grab it like this, drag it all the way across, and I can calculate descriptive statistics really easily for this data set. Now, What we worked on in class is thinking about this is a good way to do things if you have a wide data set like this. So we have our sampling unit, our individual in one row, and we have each of the variables that we're interested in, each of these questions in its own column. We'll go through in a minute how we might do things a little bit easier rather than writing all these functions. But the functions work really well with wide data sets because you can calculate them and you can expand them across like we've done here. What we want to do, though, is take this information that we've gathered and put it into a format where we might put it into a report. So we want to get rid of cells like this. So if we click on the 25, we can highlight that whole row. And if we want to, we can go up to the delete here and just delete that whole row. If we want to create spaces, we can insert and then we can delete. So we're going to just delete these spaces so that we have this kind of one block of things. What we want to do now is we're going to copy all of the headers here. So we highlight all of those values, Control C to copy, Control V to paste them. And we can just do the regular paste here because they're just cells that have these different values in them that are words. Here, we're going to call this our statistic. And we're going to, now we have this block of stuff that kind of starts to look like a table that you might see somewhere in a report. We're going to highlight the whole thing, which again, we can do with our little white crosshair, or we can press anywhere in it and Control A to highlight the thing. We copy. And then what we're going to do is go to a new sheet. So we're going to click our little plus for new sheet. And we're going to paste the values here. Again, if we use the default paste, it just does this. So instead of, because it's trying to reference cells that don't exist above it. So instead of just the default paste, what we're going to do is right click and go to paste values. And there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. So if you do paste like this, Control V, this little option here pops up. So you can paste values this way. You can also, if you just do Control V, you can press the Control key. It opens that up, and you can press V for values. So that would be, again, for the keystroke, for the people who are interested in the keystroke commands, you copy, you come here, Control V, Control V for values. And that will get you this table. From here, we can highlight this whole thing again, and we want to transpose it so that we have the questions as rows and then the statistics as the columns. So we can copy it again. And one of Excel's other special pastes is that we can transpose. So we come over here, we right click, and then we go to transpose. So with this, same thing. If we wanted to do it another way, we can come to this cell, Control V, it just pastes it, press Control, and then T for transpose. So now we can actually get rid of this. So we can highlight all of those cells, all of those columns by holding it by clicking on the 12, highlighting it all the way up, holding it with our mouse, and then we can just delete all those rows because we only really want our summary table here. And now what we have is a table that's looking a little bit clearer, right? We can adjust the column widths with our mouse here. If you want it to just automatically update, you can go up until you go between the columns and you can double click like that. And it will automatically adjust it to being as wide as the widest entry in that column. And we could copy and paste something like this into a Word document where we might report on it. One of the things that we might want to do first is consider formatting these really heavy decimal values because we don't really need them that much. And if we highlight all of these things, again, with that little mouse cursor, we can click these buttons to decrease or increase the amount of decimals. So we can decrease them so that it's only, say, 1 decimal. So this is the type of table that you might expect to see in a report, and the type of table that I will expect from your report for assignment 1. The next bit is kind of a different way that we could calculate some of these things, and it uses some of the more advanced tools in Excel. And so we go from this wide data set, to a long data set where we want to have one column for the ID, and we would have it repeating, and then we would have one column for the question, where we would have QU1, QU2, QU3, and so on and so forth. And in each one, we would have the values. So in this, and then in a third column, we would have the values. So we would have 10 or 5, 10, 7. And we could copy and paste all this stuff, but Excel has a really cool tool called Power Query to be able to do that. And I'll show you why we might want this. Again, if we have the wide data set, it's really easy to calculate stuff with functions like this. But if we convert it to this type of long data set, which I'm just going to delete because we don't need it, we're going to use one of the other tools, you can analyze it in using other tools in Excel. So what we can do is, because this is a single block, we can right-click it, and we could say, get data from table or range. And when we do that, it's going to say, okay, where is the data for your table, and does it have headers? By headers, it just means those column names. So we click OK because it's highlighted by these green things, the right block of stuff. We click OK. Then it's going to take us into the Power Query window, which is one of my favorite parts of Excel. And so Power Query is really great because you can see all of the different queries that you have. And in each one of them, you can see the different steps that you have done to manipulate your data set, which makes it really replicable and really easy for somebody to come in and say, what is it that you've done with this data, rather than writing out all those functions where it's really easy to make a mistake. So in this one, what we want to do is take all of these question columns, and we want to pivot them or unpivot them so that it's a longer data set. So what we do is we click on QU1, just like that. We hold the Shift key, and we click the right arrow all the way to go to the side so that we can highlight all of our question columns. From here, we go to Transform, and we go to Unpivot. And what this does is it takes them so that we can go from this wide format to this long format. And in this, we can do other steps to manipulate our data, like change the name of the columns. So we can call this the question column, and we can leave that as the value column. And now we're in this longer format data set where we can actually use some of Excel's other tools to summarize things really easily. So once we've done that manipulation, we can go ahead and say close and load. And that's going to bring it into this table here. So now you can see that we have all of these values for question 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And so what we could do is, just to prove to you that this is the same data, we can filter it using these little drop downs at the top, and we can just pull up question 1. And so question 1 has all of these values. And if we compare that to our sheet 1, I can grab all these, copy them, put them here. Instead of, actually, that's not going to work. So we'll clear that. We'll sort it by question, and then I will grab these values and I'll pull them over here. And we can see that they are indeed all the same values from question 1, from IDs 1 to 20 that we had over here. One of the other reasons that this is a really cool tool is that if you change any of the values in this table, you can actually update this query with the refresh button. So for example, if all of a sudden question 1, this one is an answer of 100, which we don't want, you see that it's right now ID 1, question 1 is not 100, but you can actually refresh this and it will update based on that data. So I'm just going to undo those. But it is a really cool tool to be able to do a lot more replicable stuff in Excel. The next tool that we can use to actually summarize this and get some descriptive statistics is a pivot table. So if we go up to this table design, we can click Summarize with Pivot Table. And that allows us to basically scrunch up this whole data set by any of these variables and then calculate summary statistics. So we're going to click Existing Worksheet, and we're going to put it just over here on E2. And we can take this question. Now we have this pivot table pane that's popped up. And what it allows us to do is move any of the fields or the columns into different arrangements so that we can summarize the data in different ways. So we can take question and we can drag it down to rows, or if we wanted to, we could put it across in the columns. So we can put it in rows for now, and then we can summarize it by the different values that we have. The default, because it has a bunch of numbers like this, it thinks that you might want the sum, but we don't actually want the sum. What we want is other descriptive statistics like the sample size. So if we click on this little triangle here, you go to value field settings, and it brings up this little pane here where you can change the way that it's calculating all of the numbers that are in question 1. And so we're going to go ahead and take the count. Now it's easily counting all of the values for each of these questions. We could bring value down by grabbing it with our mouse. So we're holding the mouse key and then we drag it back down to values again. And then we can have multiple summary statistics for our questions. So here I click the little drop down again, you go to value field settings, and instead of the count, I want the average this time. And so now I'm just going to put these beside each other so that we can compare, make sure that we're doing this right. So I click view, I click new window, and now I can have 2 windows of the same Excel sheet beside each other. So I have this one, I'll move it over here, which I did by just grabbing it at the top here, and then you throw it over into the side and it'll take up the side. And then I can click this one to bring up that one there. So I'm gonna click this X so I have some more space here, click this X so I have some more space here. And so we can put this beside our descriptive statistics one. And so we can see that for question 1, we have a sample size of 20. We have a mean of 3.7, which is just that number rounded. And then for question 2, we have 4.8, which is that value there, 4.6. And so we're getting all of the right values for as the same way that we calculated it there. I'm going to make this full screen again. If in the pivot table you get rid of your fields thing over here, you can always add them back in by clicking on the field list button. So we click fields. I can drag down this and I can summarize even more values to get things like the max or min or the standard deviation. And so it's kind of limited because you only have these options, and you'll see that we don't have things like quartile or median and stuff like that, but it's still pretty useful for being able to get at a lot of these statistics in a really quick and easy way. And it all just depends on kind of how you have your data structured. So again, if you have this wide data set, it's pretty easy to use the functions to calculate these things, and you can just do them in one spot and drag them over. But if you understand how the data is structured and you want to use some of the more replicable tools in Excel, it's also pretty easy to just use something like Power Query to manipulate the way that it's structured, and then use other tools like pivot tables or something to summarize that data in lots of different ways. And Power Query has the ability to do this too, but I wanted to introduce you just to the pivot tables as an option of doing this same thing. So if we use the Power Query, we have a little bit more flexibility with how we would want to bunch this up and then summarize the values. But just for now, this is kind of a good way that we can work through some of these issues. So I hope that this was helpful, and I wish you the best with the assignment. I know that Excel is a little bit scary, but hopefully you can recognize that what we're trying to do here is really give you a couple of tools of approaching like lots of common problems in ways that are hopefully going to make your life a lot easier. And at the end of the day, my big message really is, if you structure your data in an understandable and proper way, then it makes it a lot easier to do a lot of things in this program and then summarize it in a way that makes everyone around you a lot happier. So thanks for watching.